Hey there, everybody. It's another Friday, which means here we are with another Experience Investigators Ask Me Anything webinar. I'm Jeannie Walters. I'm thrilled to have you here with us, as always, every week. And we are always looking for where you're joining us from. We love to find out. We have a global audience, so let us know where you are and what are your plans for this weekend? We are looking at a beautiful weekend here in Chicago, so I'm excited about that. Feels like summer has actually started. So where you are and what your plans are for the weekend. Today we're going to be talking about terms and language in customer experience. There are some tricky terms that we throw around in customer experience. So we thought it might be a good idea to help define those a little bit, at least with our perspective, so that you can use these in the work and the strategy that you do around your own customer experience and customer experience management. So, as always, we have with us here today David Hornreich, who is our Director of Marketing. Hi, David.
Hello, how are you doing today?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing great.
What are your plans for the weekend?
My plans for the weekend are to figure out what my plans are for the weekend. I don't know. It's supposed to be rainy again here in Seattle.
Mm,
It's been a beautiful week, so I think it might be some indoor activities, maybe, dare I say, some cleaning up around the house.
yeah, it has to be done sometimes. It has to be
Yeah,
done. But
may as well do it when it's raining outside, right?
that's true. That's very true. Yeah, that's good. Well, we are possibly having a year-end soccer team party, but there's some scheduling around that. So we'll see if that works. And, kind of the same, just cleaning up, maybe doing some yard work, things like that. So I guess you and I aren't very exciting people.
No, we're not. Luckily, we've got exciting people in the chat.
Oh, good.
Naomi in Milwaukee is celebrating a wedding this weekend. So
Oh,
that's very,
fun.
very exciting. It's cool to
Yeah.
see weddings kind of start to happen again and
Hmm.
ceremonies. Tyler, hello. Good to see you as always. He's taking in a soccer game live and in person with his dad. I wonder, Tyler, let us know, is this a Columbus Crew match that
Oh,
you're going to or another one?
wow. You knew that right away.
I
That's
did. I've been
impressive.
following the drama with the Crew have considered dropping their name and just being Columbus, and it's been a
Hmm.
whole thing. I won't
Wow.
get into it. I'll spare everybody. But
That
and
sounds like some drama.
Lorena joining us from Columbia. Plan this weekend is enjoying time with the family. That's always a good plan.
Nice. Oh, where are you in Colombia? Because I had one of my favorite business trips ever was to Medellin. It's a beautiful country, beautiful place, beautiful people. So I have a very soft spot in my heart for Colombia. So good to see you here too. And yeah, we are I think we're about ready to go, but Tyler is going to what is that?
Cleveland SC versus Pittsburgh Hotspurs. Cool.
Okay.
My wife
Nice.
is from Pittsburgh, so not that I really have a rooting interest in it, Tyler, but if I did, I might have to go against you just in this case.
That makes perfect sense, doesn't it?
You know, I've got to pick my wife over you,
That's
Tyler.
right.
No offense.
Excellent. Well, it's great to see everybody here as always. And throughout this discussion, if you have questions either about the topics at hand or about anything really related to customer experience or our weekend plans, whatever you want to ask, go ahead and throw it into the chat. And after we get through the presentation portion, we will be answering those questions. So feel free to communicate via chat. We always love hearing from you and hearing your feedback as well. So keep that up. So, for those of you who don't know me, I am Jeannie Walters, and I am CEO of a company called Experience Investigators. I've spent more than 20 years looking at customer experiences, how to improve them, how to understand them, how to make sure that we are delivering on the promises that we made for customers. And we do this through keynote speaking, through virtual events like this, as well as through a lot of training and workshops and coaching for executives around the world. So, something we're really passionate about. We have an amazing team here at Experience Investigators, and I'm always thrilled to see how many people are out there who are just as passionate about this topic as I am. So, welcome. This is your crew. We are in this together, and I love it. So let's talk about what we're talking about today. So today we are talking about how words matter in customer experience. And this is becoming more and more important because as customer experience has grown, as it's become more of an industry, a business discipline, how we are taking it seriously in more and more organizations, meaning that we are having leadership dedicated to it, chief customer officers, chief experience officers. We are developing those all important tools like a customer experience mission and a customer experience strategy. So instead of just kind of tossing out this idea of customer experience, we're really applying business rigor to it, which is what exactly we need to do because it can't just be talk. We actually have to turn customer experience into customer experience management and make sure we are intentionally and proactively not just planning the journey for our customers, but understanding them and their real journey so that we can deliver more and more for them. But when we have interacted with organizations, sometimes we hear terms that are thrown around, and sometimes even in the same room at the same conference table, two people might be referring to something and not realize that they are defining it differently. And so this is something we've really been looking at. We are actually developing our customer experience glossary right now, and we're putting some finishing touches on it. It will be a living, breathing tool that you can refer to. And once that comes out, that's part of our Year of CX. If you haven't signed up for that, yearofcx.com. It's a free way to get all of our tools available as we release them. And if you want to sign up and not miss that release, that's the best way to do it. But essentially, when we started talking about this, we realized that this is a big topic. People are really struggling with this. And when we sometimes hear from clients, they tell us things like, well, we want to apply customer experience to this. And once we start really talking to them, we realize, well, they're not really talking about customer experience in general or overall. They're talking about one part of it, like a voice of the customer program. So, as we explore some of the trickier terms today, we're just going to go over four of them briefly. I encourage you to ask what are those terms that maybe you want to talk about today, that you want us to include in the glossary, that you want to make sure that we kind of hash out with you today. This is about how language evolves. And so we're not claiming to be Merriam or Webster here. We are trying to really just help you understand words and terms so that we can make the most of them. So let's talk about the terms that we'll go over today. The first one, moments of truth, one of my favorites. Next, we're going to be talking about that term touchpoint, empathy, which is something that everybody feels like they understand, which takes a little bit more understanding sometimes. And then ultimately, what is a customer experience strategy? So these terms might be really familiar to you, and you might be thinking, well, what is there to understand about this? These terms might be things that you think, yeah, we've never really defined this in our organization. So even if you feel like you understand these terms, I encourage you to think about how do we apply this in our organization in a universally understood way? Because that's how you know the communication is effective. That's how you know you're defining your goals and your outcomes in the best way. And that's how ultimately you deliver on that customer experience strategy. So the first one, moments of truth. Sometimes this gets tossed around as moments that matter. And the way that we define this is these are those points along the customer's journey that have a disproportionate impact on the rest of the journey. And so what we mean by that is these are those highs or lows that really either build or erode that trust to the point where it impacts the rest of the journey. It impacts how they feel about their relationship with your brand. So, another way to kind of look at this is to think about those emotional points in the journey. When do we either deliver and exceed those expectations to the point of delight and surprise and all those things that you hear about? Or where do we not deliver? Where is there too much friction? And where is the burden on the customer to the point where they think, this is not working for me? I no longer trust that the rest of this journey is going to go along in the way that I expect. So when we figure out what those moments are, that's where we want to invest our time and our energy and our resources. That's why it's so important to understand these moments along your customer's journey. It's really easy to fall into a habit where we either think everything is one of these huge moments or we think nothing is. And so you have to kind of use judgment here about what really matters, but you can also rely on your data. You can rely on techniques like customer interviews, which we've talked about during these sessions together, as well as provided resources, because we believe that that's where you really hear about those emotional peaks, those emotional valleys that you need to address with those moments of truth. And so you can see we've got a resource for you there. That also is a part of our Year of CX program. So, moments of truth, moments that matter. Understand what those mean in your organization, and even better, in your organization, define what is that impact. If you have the data available, if you have the feedback available, you can say things like, okay, well, this moment we know drives our NPS down. We know that if this moment doesn't go well, they are less likely to renew. Those are the types of things that you want to define so that as you move forward, everybody there understands the true impact of these moments of truth. So the next one we're going to talk about, Touchpoint, one of my favorites, one of our all-time most successful blogs. I wrote several years ago about touchpoints and defining those. And that blog was actually put into an academic college textbook. And that really made me realize that this is something that we need to talk about more. Because when we talk about touchpoints, you hear this phrase, this term, kind of tossed around in different circles. So, for instance, a marketing person might define a touch point slightly differently than a customer experience person. A product developer might also define that differently. So, when we are talking about customer experience, the way I define touch points, it's that interaction point between your customer and your company. Now, sometimes what's been happening is touch points get used interchangeably with the word channels. So we say things like, well, social media is a touch point, or we say the website is a touch point. Now, in my view, I like to think of those as channels. Those are more general. When I look at a touch point, I'm literally thinking about where is that interaction point. So when you're developing customer journeys, especially when you're trying to understand your customer journey, if you're just talking about things like, well, the interaction point is social media, that doesn't give you enough information to understand what is the journey actually like? Where are those moments of truth? Where are those emotional points that we really have to understand in order to deliver for our customer? So I define touch points as, along the journey, it might be something like when they are searching on your website, that is a touch point. When they are actually taking that action, what is that interaction like? What tools are available to them? What does that feel like to them? Those are the types of detailed touch points I like to look at. Not everybody likes to get that detail, but I find that if we can do that, if we can really understand what's happening in that moment with the customer and with that point of interaction, then that becomes a more nuanced understanding of our customers and their journey. So, this one I know is one of the trickiest ones because there are certain templates out there, even for journey mapping, that define touch points in a totally different way. They define them as those channels. And so when we are thinking about touch points, it's and discussing them, it's really important that we all get on the same page about what are we talking about here, because that's really what matters. It's all about communication. So just make sure that everybody understands how you're defining it at your organization or within the context of what you're working on, like a journey map. Empathy is another one. Now, empathy, by definition, is the ability to share feelings of another. And I think intuitively, we all know this pretty well. The reason we include this here is because in our world, in customer experience, we need to turn empathy into action. We need to make sure that we're not just feeling for somebody, we're actually taking that next step and either acting on their behalf, acting on the behalf of all customers, or really making sure that they understand that we're not just saying, yeah, I hear you. Okay, following a script. That's not real empathy. The other thing that I really think is worth noting is that empathy is a finite resource in all of us. So we have to really be careful. We have to reserve that empathy strength that we all have for one another, including our contact center agents. Let's look at how can we make it easier for them to express empathy without, being inauthentic, but then really reserve those times when we need to show and act on empathy on behalf of our customers. Make sure that they have those reserves available, because if we ask everybody to just show incredible empathy for every single interaction, then that will run out by the end of the day. That's a strange thing to think about, but it's true. And so we have to really make sure that we understand that empathy is not just something that you talk about. You have to act on it, and you have to make sure that your people can act on it when they're asked to. And so it takes a lot of management on that back end to make sure that we are expressing empathy in the right way, acting on it, and providing enough support for the frontline people who are asked to really share that moment and show their empathy. So this is another good one to really talk about. What do we mean by empathy? Does that mean that within this organization, we're going to script everything? No, that's not what it means. Does it mean that we'll be able to act on it in these ways? So that's the type of detail that is really important to get into when you're talking to your teams about empathy. And then have empathy for your teams, have empathy for the very people who need to deliver empathy to your customers, and show that to them. Act on that, because that is part of how we deliver for our customers. We show up for our employees and our teams in the same way that we want them to show up for our customers. And finally, my favorite, the biggest one, customer experience strategy. Now, this seems, again, straightforward, but when we talk about that unifying mission for the team and how they operate on a daily basis to give the best possible customer experience, the one that we've defined in our customer experience success statement within our organization, we need to make sure that when we talk about customer experience strategy, people know that that's not just words, because that's what sometimes kills the strategy. We've all been there where an executive will stand up and get very excited and say, we are now going to work on customer experience in new ways. But then there's nothing to back that up. There is no business backbone to really say we're taking this seriously. And when you develop a customer experience strategy, what you're saying is we're taking this seriously. We're applying a vision to it. We're going to deliver on these actions and outcomes. And this is how we will do it. It's like any other business strategy. We have to start talking about customer experience in the same ways that we talk about the other parts of the business that just get things done, right? We don't talk about things like a sales strategy as this foreign concept. We don't just say to our sales teams, well, sell more. That's all. We have to have those definitions of outcomes and how we want them to do this. The same thing needs to be applied to customer experience. So if you are looking to change your customer experience and you have not yet thought about your customer experience strategy, I encourage you to do so. And it's not enough to just say, let's deliver a great customer experience. You have to get detailed. You have to make sure that you understand the outcomes. You have to make sure you understand how you're measuring success. And that's why we provided these tools like our success statement, because it helps you really think about what are the very outcomes that we know we want to achieve, and then how will we achieve those. So that's what strategy is all about. And I encourage you to really think about that, define it, and then this one, talk about it everywhere in your organization. Talk about it whenever you're talking about customer experience. Will this help us live up to that strategy? Will this help us deliver those outcomes within our strategy? That type of thinking is super important in order to keep customer experience top of mind and actually deliver on it from that business perspective. So these are the 4 things that we went over today: moments of truth, touchpoint, empathy, customer experience strategy. Now, there are so many more terms we could have gone through. These were just a few. And like I mentioned, we are going to release that glossary as one of our next tools in the year of CX. So be sure you sign up for that. If you want to see certain words, or if you have different definitions, we want to hear that too. So let us know both in the comments and then reach out to us in whatever in whatever way you want. We're all out there. And then, the last thing I want to say here is this is really about communication. This is really about making sure that when you sit down with people, that you are communicating in a way that they understand exactly what you're talking about and that you are both on that same page. So even when you're bringing on team members, having something like this that you can say, this is how we're defining things, that can be super helpful. Anytime we bring on team members, we also have to remember those acronyms that we throw around, define that for them as well. CX, we say that all the time. And sometimes people haven't come from that background, so they might not have heard that before. This is about making sure that, we might not get it perfectly aligned all the time, or there might be times where a different organization defines something slightly different than we do, or even a different customer experience professional might define it slightly differently. That's okay. But what we want to do is make sure we're communicating. And so instead of being kind of a purist about this and saying this is the only way to do it, think about it as a tool for your communication. That's what we're aiming for by talking through all of these terms. So, are you really sure that you're defining things in a way that is communicating in the right way with others in your organization? That's the question I want you to pose. That's the question I would love for you to explore within your own organization. And my hope is that our definitions, our glossary can really help you kind of get that kick started in your organization. So at this point, I would love to hear questions. I would love to hear your comments, your feedback, what terms you want us to tackle, anything like that.
Yeah, and let's start off with a question that came in from email this week.
Great.
Um, so this is about emotional connection, which you've talked about a lot. The question is, how do you measure emotional connection? So you've talked about how important emotional connection is, but it would be great to know if it's even measurable at all, like something like customer satisfaction is measured. And if it is, how can we go about that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So when we talk about CX metrics in general, I think it's really important to understand the best use cases of each of those metrics. And in my experience, I have found that things like customer satisfaction are really great for kind of that transactional point. So if you get off a service call, if you have a specific purchase point, like a delivery, did the delivery go well? Were you satisfied with the delivery? That type of thing can be very effective to gauge those specific interactions, those specific touch points. But it's not an emotional factor. Satisfaction is not how we typically measure emotion. Net promoter score, on the other hand, can be a way to measure emotion if it's done well. And if you also allow for folks to kind of do it in the right moment along their customer journey. And that takes some nuance and understanding. But essentially, net promoter score is more of an emotional way to gauge that. There's also customer effort score, which can be very effective, especially with self-service, things like that, where we're asking the customer, hey, was this difficult for you? Did you put in too much effort? That can actually tell you a lot about their emotional state too. So what I like to do is really look at the entire journey and figure out where are the best places for this? How will we gauge this? And then how can we also align that with whatever data we can collect from things like their unstructured feedback? What do they say in the NPS survey about why or why not? What do they say in open form text in any feedback, mechanism that we have? And how do we get that? So you can use text analytics. You can also use, now there are very sophisticated artificial intelligence platforms out there that do a great job with this. There are also things like, that some organizations have experimented with. And there's no universal answer here. You really do have to look at your organization. But we've all been in the airport or something like that where we see those kiosks with the happy faces that go down to the sad face. They can be very effective. Using emojis in a quick survey, things like that, that can actually tell you that. Now there's facial recognition software that sometimes can tell you this person is frustrated, this person is happy. So we've got all these points of input now for emotion, But really, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for kind of that nuanced approach, that holistic approach to understand our customers more. And if you can align those things with, you know what, we know based on customer effort score, based on the NPS, and based on maybe some text analysis, we know that in this point in the journey, if customers get frustrated, then they are less likely to purchase from us again. If you can start lining those moments up, that's when you can start really seeing the return on the investment and where you need to focus in order to get those improvements made. It's very difficult to prioritize in customer experience. I think it's one of the hardest things we have to do. And so understanding that emotional state can really make that clear for the people who need to provide that investment. So storytelling is also part of this. If you're reporting out, make sure you're including customer quotes, some customer stories that really showcase that emotion, because as human beings, that's what we relate to the most. So if you're only talking numbers, start incorporating storytelling into how you report customer experience out there. And I know we've written about this and talked about this, and so there are resources out there as well. But I think that emotional connection goes both ways. We need to make sure we're providing it to our employees, that they're providing it for our customers, and then we're reporting back on that connection to the very people who need to make these decisions. So it's a whole cycle, but we're just emotional. That's all. We're just emotional creatures.
We're human beings.
We are. We are.
Let's jump to a question from Tyler. Is there value in defining and stating the difference between design thinking, user-centered design, and human-centered design?
Yeah.
Because to me, these are pretty similar boats to help you cross the same ocean, but I've lost a ton of productive time to team members debating those terms. And I kind of want to jump on this question as well to ask, at what point when we're trying to define and get on the same page with terms, do we get lost in the semantics where it becomes counterproductive, and how can we avoid that?
What a great question, Tyler. As always, you always bring it. So I think I'm of two minds a little bit here, because some of those terms like design thinking and I can't remember exactly if you said this. Thank you. Human-centered design, or there's, human computer interaction, things like that. So when we are looking at those, sometimes people have trained very hard and have a ton of knowledge to have that kind of certification, to have that knowledge. And so it's kind of like probably how I feel when somebody says to me, well, customer experience and customer service are the same thing. I want to be like, oh, no, let me explain. And of course, they might actually be thinking about it in the same way. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's why we need to figure out this communication piece. What are we trying to communicate? What is the outcome? And how do we make sure we're on the same page? But I do agree that defining those things in a way within your organization is helpful, because if I come in and think, well, it's got to be design thinking, that's what we're calling it, that's what this is, and somebody else comes in and they're saying user-centered design, and we think we're talking about the same thing or not, like, let's make that agreement. What are we calling it here? How do we approach it here? That's where I think it can be incredibly beneficial. But I hear you on the debate too, because I think sometimes we do. I mean, I mentioned, like, don't be a purist. Sometimes it's hard not to be. If you've really embraced these terms to the point where you feel like that's your reason for being, right? So I think it's really important to focus on what are we communicating, what's the most important outcome, and how can we compromise? How can we say, okay, here, this is how we're just defining design thinking here. And yes, we're leveraging the original definition, but we're also talking about it in this way. Or user experience is this, or whatever those terms are. We need to make sure we define that, just like we do with customer experience in our organizations too. So really, really good question. And I totally relate to what you're saying.
I really want to make a joke about semantics, but I'm not going to. Let's go to a question from Naomi. Naomi says, the point that you made on empathy with the contact center agents helping them understand how to apply empathy. Made me wonder, Jeannie, if you can provide an example or a use case of a solution that you've experienced.
Yeah, I think this is so interesting because I think when we've seen kind of this evolution of contact centers and how in the beginning it was just, kind of hire anybody off the street, give them a script, call it a day. And we quickly learned that that's not enough. We need people who have some innate skills here, who understand and can be compassionate, who are patient, who are also willing to get the information they need when they need it. So you need to kind of be inquisitive, you need to be curious. There are all these traits we ask our contact center agents to be. And so I think with empathy, what happens is if we ask them to be overly empathic for every single interaction that they have, then we're kind of we're doing a disservice not just to them but also to the customer. If a customer calls in and says, "You know what? Um, I lost my statement for something. Can you send me a new statement? A new invoice, something like that." I don't think we need to be falling over ourselves with empathy on that. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. Let me fix that for you. How are you feeling? Like we don't have to do that in that moment. But I think we went so far the other way where we thought that was the answer that then when somebody called in and said, "You know what? I lost my job and I need your help reconfiguring how I pay you guys." That's a situation where we need to have empathy. That's a situation where we need to have that nuance. And so I think part of it is explaining to contact center agents, you know what, sometimes people just want to get stuff done. Let's help them get that stuff done in the fastest and most effortless way we can and wrap it up. We don't have to constantly fall over ourselves. I think the other part of that is allowing contact center agents to take really good care of themselves. What I mean by that is if they have a hard call, I mean, we've all seen this, right? Where somebody has a really hard call with a customer. Either the customer is very upset and you can't really get that de-escalated, or it's something tough. People have to call in when their spouses pass away and they have to cancel things. That's a hard call. So let your contact center agents know that after something like that, it's okay to take a break. It's okay to walk around. Some contact centers have really innovative well-being programs now, including like having a little exercise room off of the contact center, having a place where they can get some of that immediate feedback from somebody who is available to them. So I think that there are all sorts of ways that we can really take care of people. And I think we have to prioritize it because otherwise we are asking people to burn out right when we need them to show the empathy. And that's what I mean about making sure that we're acting on that empathy too, not just for our customers, but behaving and allowing and empowering agents and other employees to really take care of themselves so that they have that empathy when it's truly needed for them.
And I love this follow-up comment from Tatiana regarding empathy. This same week, two different contact center agents at the same telecom chatting at the same time, one with me, one with Tatiana's husband. One approached the situation with empathy and proposed a solution. The other just replied that we should go visit a branch to get a
Yep.
solution. Such a huge difference. And that makes me wonder, are the leadership aware of that difference? And are they
Mm-hmm.
training the better version of that?
Yeah,
Is that something that probably is repeatable, right?
absolutely. Absolutely. And I would bet that, if we are giving more real-time feedback to people in a way that is coaching and not punishing, then they will learn how to do these things. They will actually understand what empathy looks like from that. So if you have a great experience like that, that's a best practice that you can show your other agents. You can say, "This is how it's done." You can share the recording of that call. You can come up with scripts based on how somebody does something because you have superstars among you. You've heard me say this before, but we have so many people in our organizations who are doing things that are extraordinary for our clients and customers. And yet they're doing that based on them, based on the individual. And we're not capturing that. We're not learning from them. We're not holding them up as a role model. We have to constantly be looking for, wow, that's an incredible way that you did that. That's an incredible outcome for the customer. Let's learn from that. Let's train to it. Let's script to it. Let's all of those things, because that's what makes it cultural. That's what makes it part of the organization, instead of just, you know what, Larry was great, but Larry left and we lost all of that empathy with him. That happens over and over in our organizations, and we have to really look at what are our superstars doing and how can we learn from them, and then make that best practice that we can carry out throughout the entire customer journey, not just in that moment and not just with that one employee.
Anybody can be a Larry.
Anybody can be a Larry. Exactly.
I love this comment that Juan added. Understanding the customer journey is also critical. Sometimes the journey begins well before they first make contact with the brand. Such an important point to understand.
Amen. Yes, yes. And when we talk about customer journeys, we always start with awareness. When did they even first become aware of your brand? It's so far before when they actually purchase from you or when they reach out to you. It's this building of a relationship, just like anything else. You don't become friends with somebody by passing them in the street. And yet you might have passed them in the street, and then the next day you see them again and you start chatting. And then after a while, you're friends. The same thing happens with a brand. You might pass by, not really have a big impression, but you have some impression. And then you build the relationship from there. So it doesn't start when there's a purchase or when they first reach out to you. That's such a solid point. Thank you for bringing that up, Juan.
And so when we do customer journey mapping, one of the preliminary steps is oftentimes building a customer persona or a customer avatar, which is why I'm so happy with this question that Abdul Salam asked. Good to see you again. He says, how about buyer personas and buyer avatars? What are their effect on the customer journey?
I mean, you need one. And I like to actually say customer persona, because when we say buyer, a lot of times what happens is the journey stops when they buy. That's a sales mentality cycle. So when we talk about customer personas, what we're talking about is a representation of who this person is. And that is so critical, because if we are building customer journeys around things like, something we call a segment, a bigger group of people, if we're not getting to that specific level of who is this person that we're talking about, then we're kind of building a journey for everybody, which ends up being a journey for nobody, because we don't learn enough about what are those moments that matter to this person. So sometimes you need several different personas to really get this right. But if you select and develop a persona for your main customer, you build out that journey. You can always layer on the different personas or just different points in the journey that different personas care about. So, for example, if we are talking about, let's take school. That's top of mind right now. I've got 2 kids in school that are wrapping up their school years. And, if we look at the journey of who is the customer of a school, well, yeah, the students, they're very important, right? And a first grade student is very different than a 12th grade student. So those personas would be different, even though technically they have the same school year, maybe. Another layer to that is the parent experience, right? I am a very different persona than the kid in school. The other thing you might want to think about are those teachers. What are they going through? So that's the type of thing, is to get to that one person. Think about, who are you building this journey for? That's what personas can do and make it so powerful, because that also helps you understand, what are you kind of zeroing in on for this journey, what's most important versus things that maybe aren't as important. So that's the power of personas, is to really understanding, who are you really trying to understand and who are you trying to deliver for.
And I think talking about the customer journey, this is a perfect segue into Jeannie. You've got a course right now that just went live. That's open registration for a limited time, and it's completely free through OpenSAP. Here's a link to that. It's called Understanding Your Customer's Journey. And so if anybody wants, you can go take those lessons for free right now. But there's also a discussion section, and there's been some good discussion going around some of the topics that are brought up in that course. And one of them is touch points. I know we already kind of talked about touch points already, but there's a lot of debate about what a touch point really means and how touch points vary depending on the channel and whether it's digital or physical and in person. So can you speak a little bit more to, do touch points, do we need to think about touch points differently depending on the channel? Or can we kind of think about them all? Are there blanket statements that we can apply to touch points across the board?
Yes and no. So when it comes to touch points, they're most useful when we're really thinking about what is this journey? What is it like? What do we do? And so it depends a little bit on the scope of that journey. So the way I think about this is there are times where you're really zeroing in on something like the digital experience for your customers. So that's when you're going to look at, okay, what are all those digital touch points? Well, that could be when they open up the app, when they're trying to find something on the app, when they are interacting with our site. But what happens when they go from the site on their laptop to the site on their phone? That's the type of thing that I like to think through when I'm thinking through the journey and zeroing in on those touch points. If you're thinking kind of bigger scale, sometimes it's okay to have things like bigger kind of buckets of touch points. So you could say, okay, if they come through the digital channel, these are the touch points. If they come through the physical channel, these are the touch points. I don't like to super generalize to the point where it becomes a channel. I think it's so much more effective if you get a little more nuanced and you dig into those interaction points a little bit. It can mean that it can feel a little overwhelming. And that's why it's really important when you're talking about journey mapping to really define your scope and your goal, because that helps you zero in on which touch points are we really looking at and how can we address them. The other part of this is, we have a tool that isn't as popular as it used to be because it's journey mapping has kind of taken over. But there is a technique you can use called touchpoint inventory, where you literally think through what are all of these interaction points? What are the ways that you can, if you're building awareness of a brand, what are the touch points that customer might have? Well, it could be something as simple as walking by the sign of a store. It could be something like searching for a specific thing on Google and getting served up the brand. So those are the types of things that if you can really think through what is the customer doing or trying to do, that's what kind of reveals those touch points to you. But it can be a little overwhelming because now there are so many ways that we interact between customers and brands. That's why really defining what are you trying to do, what's the scope, what's the goal, and then defining those touch points within that context is so, so important.
Love it. I think that's going to about wrap it up for this week. Jeannie, any final thoughts to bring us home?
It's always just a thrill to be here with you and to make sure that you are communicating with one another and with us. It always just warms our heart. So thank you for all the communication that you're doing. Thank you for really trying to understand these terms better. And thank you for being here week after week. We show up either live or recorded sometimes week after week because we've heard the feedback from you. We get these great questions and we're here to really, help support what you're doing. So if you ever want to ask a question or let us know what you want us to cover or add something to our glossary, you can reach out to us in all these various ways. If we haven't connected on Twitter or LinkedIn or Instagram, please feel free to do that. And then, keep doing what you're doing. It really is important work that we do. And the reason I'm so passionate about it is because the mission of my company is to create fewer ruined days for customers, because I really believe that makes a better world for all of us. And by you being here week after week with me, I know that that's part of your goal too, and you're helping me live that mission. So thank you so much. So we will see you again soon. Enjoy your weekend, and thanks for all you do.